Hey Appleby, Toba here, this year's Walkerhouse Prefect, and I want to introduce you to Walker's Chapel Week video. Woohoo! So for this year's Walkerhouse Chapel Week, we decided to choose the theme intersectionality. And we chose this after a lot of discussion, and we ultimately decided with this because it was a topic that a lot of us were passionate about, and we want to share that passion with you. So hopefully you sit tight, enjoy our video, and learn something new. So to start off, we asked a couple members of our Appleby community, including our House Council members, what they would define intersectionality to be. And here's what they said.
Hey, Ms. Keita.
Hey, Rachel.
What do you know about intersectionality?
Well, intersectionality is when you have a Venn diagram and the two circles overlap. The middle is the intersection.
What do you know about intersectionality?
I really don't know. I think it involves two things intersecting, but I don't know.
Hi, Ms. K. What do you know about intersectionality?
I know that it was invented or coined by Kimberly Kershaw, who was a legal activist, and that it's a theory that proposes that there's multiple forms of oppression that are constantly intersecting.
Intersectionality is the overlapping of one's identity with individual different groups that experience both discrimination or disadvantage in our society and system. An example would be someone who is a person of color and gay. Those two are both overlapping minorities.
Watching a few videos of our Appleby community members, you can see that there's a fairly distributed understanding of what intersectionality means. But for those of you watching this video who are still a little bit confused, intersectionality was a term coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw back in 1989, and it refers to the recognition of the complex and cumulative ways different forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, and classism, overlap and exacerbate an individual's identity. It pretty much states that having multiple identities contributes to a higher likelihood that you'll be impacted by numerous social rights and human rights issues. It also sheds light to the power dynamics within discrimination laws that aren't acknowledged within courts. So to give an example of how this could possibly play out, efforts to fight racism would require examining other forms of prejudice, such as anti-Semitism, for example, or efforts to eliminate gender disparities would require examining how women of color experience gender bias differently from white women, or how non-white men do too compared to white men. Hopefully that not so short definition of intersectionality made things a little bit clearer for those of you who are a little bit confused at the start. Now we're going to be moving on to why intersectionality is important and why we should talk about it and what it means to some of our House Council members. So stay tuned.
Hi, my name is Rachel, and I find it important to speak of intersectionality because it's often overlooked, especially by people of privilege. Walker finds it integral that the Appleby community starts conversations and teaches people around the issues that are faced. Most people of privilege will never experience the emotions or truly understand those that are affected by being in a minority or are discriminated.
Intersectionality is what makes me unique and what makes my experiences so different from everybody else's. And it is what makes our community so diverse and beautiful.
Hi, so I think it is important to recognize the concept of intersectionality as people are only who they are because of how the different parts of their identity add up together, and how someone is treated may differ depending on how these different parts to their identity add up, and we must acknowledge that and be more aware of that.
It's important to talk about intersectionality because oppression affects people in different ways based on different aspects of their identity. Therefore, everyone has their own unique story, so we must acknowledge and consider how all these identities work together on multiple levels.
Hi, intersectionality to me is about acknowledging the fact that everyone has their own unique experience of discrimination. And with that, I become more aware and open-minded in my daily life.
After watching the videos of our House Council members, you can see that intersectionality means something different to each and every single one of us. But even with that, there's one main commonality, and that is, it is essential to understand the concept of intersectionality if we want to become a more socially aware and progressive society. It is essential when working to dismantle the very evident power dynamics that exist today, and it is also essential when working to level the playing field for all people regardless of their identities through changing the structures that underpin our politics, laws, and cultures. Some inequalities that exist within our society today that need more attention are economic inequalities such as employment, poverty, wage and age and income, and social political inequalities such as gender, class, education, and women's inequality in decision making. Next, our House Council members put together a short video describing real-life examples where the lack of understanding of intersectionality affected real people's lives.
For our story, I'd like to recount a lesson Kimberly Crenshaw spoke of in her TED Talk about intersectionality. Freddie Gray was a loved son and brother, living with his sister. He worked hard to end the generational cycle of poverty he had been born into, and despite the days of stress and difficulties he faced, he continued to work very hard. Now, Tanisha Anderson was a stellar high school student as well, with the plans of becoming a broadcasting journalist. She was radiant, and despite being diagnosed with bipolar disorder in her 20s, loved and cared for her 16-year-old daughter. They never knew each other. They never even lived in the same place, but they did have one tragic thing in common. They both died at the hands of police brutality as African American individuals. Throughout her TED Talk, Kimberly questioned the audience she spoke to if they knew the identities of various African American victims killed by the police. About half could recognize the first set of names who happened to be male. However, when she began to list off the female names, less than 5 people out of hundreds knew them, or even heard about them. We can understand this unequal division of acknowledgement through the lens of intersectionality. The combined identity of each person plays a factor into their rights upheld by society. In the examples shown, African American women who fell victim to such fatal brutality were much less known or familiar than the men. And once we understand that people such as Miss Anderson in particular, who was also diagnosed with a mental disorder, do not receive as many rights or acknowledgement as other unfortunate victims, we understand the impact intersectionality has in our society.
And on that note, on behalf of the Walker Bears, we wanted to say a big thank you for watching our Chapel Week video, and we hope you have a great rest of your week, and we hope that you learned something new.